I think a lot of people are kind of scared to do anything at the moment, or maybe scared to like start a new business. The rest of the world's kind of on pause. So if you can jump in and start creating something, there's a lot of opportunity in that. They can generate traction. It's kind of like any startup. If you can prove product market fit, then yeah, you'll get funding.
And we are back with another session of Create Online, a little 10-part series that Simona Cotin from Developer Advocacy and I have put together to talk with various people, senior technologists, CTOs, that kind of thing, and find out how we actually can be resilient in this really, really interesting time. Today, we have on with us a total badass. I am so happy to have Lara with us. She used to be the VP of engineering at Kickstarter and was the engineering director at Etsy. And it's funny because Lara has been on the edge of my radar for a long time because I've known like the people who were in those spots before and after. And so I've always kind of had this ambient awareness of what she was doing. And as she's gone along, she's published all this really good material. In fact, she just released a new book called Resilient Management. Please plug it. And it's pretty topical for these times. And I love that the title is actually, whoops, Simona. Show the book. Come on. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So it's a pretty topical topic for these times. And I love that your book title and the title of what we're doing here match up, resilience. So hi and welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to chat with you all.
And you're talking to us today from the west coast of the U.S.?
Sure am. Yeah, hang out in slightly gloomy Portland, Oregon.
And how's that gloom been mixing in with the lockdown?
Oh man, it's funny. It was like sunny for like a solid 2 weeks in the middle so far, and those were just glorious days. The rest of it just that rainy gloom really started to affect you emotionally after a while.
Oh God, yes, it does. I lived in Portland for well over a decade and then SF before it. So, yeah, I remember those days. Oh yeah, I know. Yeah. Quick trips.
The roads are starting to come out though, and that's been lovely.
This is awesome. So when Salt and Straw opens up, the ice cream place, go there. Yeah.
Yes, I'm really excited for that first journey and the standing 6 feet away from everybody else in order to just get that ice cream.
So yeah, let's talk about your book some, especially given that the topics line up so well. One of the first things you talk about in your book is that how as a manager you need to understand the two parts of the brain, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. It's funny because my wife and I often have conversations with our son, he's 4, about the amygdala and how it's what causes some of those reactions and how we need to use our prefrontal cortex. So when I was, re-skimming your book in preparation for this, I'm reading it and I'm thinking, oh wow, I need to share this with my son. But of course, the amygdala is, always looking out for threats, and it's certainly working overtime right about now. I mean, our amygdalas collectively as a society have to be just going nuts.
Yeah. Everything's a threat, If all the amygdala is doing is looking out for threats and rewards, then there's very little rewards right now. Yeah, our amygdala, I think, as a community, you're right, is totally on fire at the moment.
So how do we calm our amygdalas down? How do we do that in both ourselves and our teams?
It's so hard. So when I talk about this, I like to talk about the reasons why our amygdala might feel threatened at any given time. There's 6 common core needs that humans have at work, and when any one of those core needs is threatened, our amygdala can go into overdrive. And as you said, the prefrontal cortex, the rational, logical part of our brains will go on standby, and our amygdala takes over and tries to keep us safe. So really, a lot of it's about trying to notice the threat, be aware of what our amygdala might be hijacked or triggered by, and extricate ourselves from the situation or try to get that core need met in some other way. I think studies have shown that it takes about 30 minutes for our amygdala to kind of chill out and calm down. There's a bunch of research out there about emotional regulation and skills that people can practice each week. I don't know any of those things. I just like to say that so that I can say go and Google it. That way you can figure that out later for for me, I start to practice like what can like bring my prefrontal cortex back online. For me, it's like doing a puzzle, Sudoku, going for a walk if you can. Those kinds of things can help like get your amygdala to chill out a little bit and bring your prefrontal cortex back online. But of course, like if you're still feeling threatened, your amygdala will continue to be active and like release those chemicals into your body. So a lot of it is, it's necessary to still know what's affecting your brain and why you're feeling the way you're feeling.
Right. So apparently we have a little bit of an echo bouncing around. So if I'm looking around kind of like, oh my God, that's why. Don't worry. I'm not freaking about what you're saying. I'm trying to see what's going on. But people say it's fixed, and so let's hope. Fingers crossed. So how are you coaching people to keep up with this? And especially one of the ways that we handle this, of course, is through our connections, our networks. So how have you been coaching the people you've been talking to through this?
Yeah, it's been really interesting actually to see how the same stimulus can affect different people in different ways. So just really quickly, as that like the core needs that I mentioned, there's the acronym for them is BICEPS. This acronym was developed by Paloma Medina, who's a coach and a trainer, and she's just phenomenal. So it stands for belonging, how to relate to a group. Improvement in progress, how do we feel like we're making progress in the things that matter to us? Are we seeing improvement in our workplaces, in our lives? Choice, right? We all want to have some level of autonomy. Equality and fairness, do we feel like things are equitable and fair around us? We all have equal access to information and resources and stuff. Predictability, which we have very little of in these very uncertain times, and significance. So, that's our status, it's how we sit in the hierarchy. So when any of these, core needs is going unmet or is feeling threatened, that's when our amygdala wakes up. So as I'm talking to people, I'm listening to how they're feeling, what's going on for them. Like honestly, I'm asking them like, what for you is hardest about this? And I'm listening for one of those 6 core needs. It might be multiple, but for everybody, it's something different. Like for me, it's definitely a sense of predictability. I had so much like work booked for April, and it's been so hard, like figuring out like all those in-person workshops. I can no longer do those things anymore, which honestly it meant for me, like all my predictability was completely thrown out the window. I've had to create more predictability for myself, doing online workshops, like rescheduling things, but for everybody it might be a sense of belonging. Like people aren't able to see their friends right now. Maybe it's fairness. Obviously, there's a disproportionate effect in certain communities right now with the pandemic. So like honestly, it could be any of the 6 core needs. So I'm trying to listen for which of the core needs might be threatened for any one person. That way we can kind of like start to get creative about how we can address those core needs for them. Totally. Yeah. So predictability definitely is the number one thing for me, but also it's been improvement and progress. So I had all these plans for like a bunch of like work for Wherewithal, the company that I run. It involved like in-person video shoots. Those can't happen anymore. So like I'm trying my best to like make progress on the things that matter to me, which not just the projects themselves, but also like the income flow. Like I want to feel like I'm making improvement and progress towards my overall yearly goals. So predictability and improvement progress have been the 2 biggest ones for me personally during this. How about you all? I mean, given that this is affecting all of us, as I kind of listed the 6 core needs, was there any particular one that stood out for you?
Yay, technical issues.
Tech, it's the best.
I took one action to try to solve it, and then I took another action to solve it, but I didn't undo my other action. Classic debugging. Yeah, I got it. Okay. So you heard my answer. Simona heard my answer, but the rest of the world did not hear my answer.
Oh no.
Oh no, that's great. No, I mean to recap, it's just all about that time horizon and predictability and what we can plan for. It's crazy how little clarity we have into what we can do in a few weeks or a few months, and yet the hardest part for me has been managing the tension between those two things. Whenever we have to do things like make plans for the summer. My wife is Greek. We love going to Greece in the summertime. That is our thing. That's what we do. And we're sitting here now in late spring thinking, okay, do we plan? Do we not? What do we do? Even though it's like so unsettled about what might happen, we're having to make decisions that can forecast what we can do and yet not necessarily be able to fully understand that that's what we are going to be. Or that's what we're going to be able to do. And so, we put money down on tickets, but we're like, well, maybe we'll use them, maybe we won't. We don't know. That's resilience for us.
It's hard. Yeah, and that lack of predictability, as you said, like that is totally threatening to our amygdalas. Absolutely. Yeah. Simona, did you have someone too?
Yeah. I think for me, some of the core biceps that have been affected are, first of all, predictability. I think I like to have things, even though I enjoy change a lot, like I like to spice things up and kind of make things interesting and change from here and there. It's quite difficult to deal with unplanned change, if that makes sense at all. And for example, my partner and I were actually planning to take a few months and not live in London anymore and kind of explore some other parts of the world. And he's actually now on a sabbatical. And we had to cancel all those plans right now because obviously it's impossible to travel. But I guess that's not necessarily one of the biggest concerns of the worldwide. It's not a world problem.
Yeah, but honestly, that doesn't matter to our amygdalas. Like our amygdala doesn't care if it's a first world problem or not. Our amygdala is still trying to look out for us, right, and try to keep us safe. So don't worry, it's totally justified. Your amygdala is still freaking out about it. It sounded like there was a mix of choice in there for you too, like that the C and biceps. I'm finding definitely like when it feels like we have that loss of control, like we can no longer have choice over the things that matter to us, or in this case, choice over where you were going to be for a certain time period. Again, it's like not a small thing to our amygdala. Our amygdala, it's trying to keep us safe, but really it can make us totally freak out. And again, obviously all the normal, as you say, like all the normal medical stuff too will totally threaten our physical needs and our biceps core needs as well. It's tricky stuff.
Yeah, and then I guess the other thing that has affected me is the fact that I don't live in the same place as my family, which means that I haven't been able to see them since December, and it's not clear yet when we're going to be able to see them again, and that's tough to deal with as well. I'm guessing that belonging,
totally. Yeah. So you see, like the same stimulus can threaten any of the 6 core needs, and even within couples, I'm like, what's going on for my husband and his core needs is different than what's going on for me. So in our household, it sounds like Duncan, like you, he really is excited to like plan for the future, and actually is soothing for his amygdala to think about the things that he'll do like in the future for travel and all of the plans. That stresses me out so much. And so I'm finding even within couples, the thing that's actually soothing to one person's amygdala might be threatening to the other person's. And we're talking about relationships, we're also talking about our teams, right? Like the way that companies are reacting and trying to, help people's core needs feel nourished, whether they're going to use that language or not, like create predictability or create certainty, create choice, help people with that sense of belonging. It might help some subset of people, but threaten other people's amygdala. So it's all really hard, nuanced, complex stuff.
Yeah, and speaking of work and kind of in the same vein, I just did an exercise which was entirely wrapped up in all of this, right? We're in a place right now in our group where we have a new general manager that came in, and that means, of course, that we need to think about what's happening and how's changing. And of course, we have the entire planetary thing going on and how we're reacting. And so we've had our general manager come in, and nobody on the team has met him in person. Right.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to establish trust and we're trying to establish connections. And I can't even imagine what he's going through on his side. Right. The same thing. And then through this, it's like, okay, how do we make sure that our jobs actually react appropriately to the crisis in the situation? And as an exercise, I went through and rewrote a job description for myself. And that's really cool, but it was incredibly stressful to go through the exercise of where are we going to be in 6 months? Where do we want to be in 12 months? How do I even set an OKR around this, or a key deliverable? I mean, I can dream up key deliverables, but how do I do this in such a way where, I'm not even sure what's going to happen, or maybe, the world really goes bad in a few months and we're all out of jobs, right? And so why am I doing all this planning anyway? And those are emotions talking, right? But they're emotions about work and making plans for work.
Yeah, your amygdala is just trying to keep you safe. Like, those emotions are normal and natural and valid. They're sometimes really annoying, but it's just like, man, this science, this neuroscience, I find it so helpful to understand as someone who now coaches managers and leaders. But even when I was managing people full time, like, it was really helpful to understand this stuff so I could understand why different members of my team were reacting so differently to the same project, or the same, in this case, task, or the same, roadmap. Like, everybody's going to have like a different reaction to it because their amygdala is just trying to keep them safe.
Right. And of course, the stressors are entirely different than what we've had. One of my colleagues lives in Israel, and they were flying drones around to enforce curfew there, if you can imagine.
Wow.
And so we're having a staff meeting, and we're talking about work stuff, and yet there's drones outside flying around in Fort.
Totally. And for a lot of parents, right, they're finding the same things in their homes with their kids. Like, they're trying to have a meeting, or they're trying to participate in a meeting, but there's like lots of other background stuff happening at the same time. One of the things I've really liked that's started to change is much more of an understanding about when interrupts happen on video calls. It seems like for a lot of companies, not all companies, but for a lot of companies, people have become much more understanding of when parents need to go at a certain point, or my personal favorite, when an animal pops up on the screen. Like, nothing makes my day more than seeing someone's cat or someone's dog hop on a video call with them.
Indeed, we've been having some of the kids have been getting to know each other through our meetings. It's been really fun. Simona spent some time with my kid the other day, and they were talking about all sorts of things, and it was an amazing little conversation.
We built a ladder that takes you from Berlin to London, and it's the best ladder ever.
That's real cute. Really cute. But well, I'm so glad to hear that you're teaching about amygdalas too. It sounds like that could lead to a lot of very interesting 4-year-old conversations.
Oh, it does. So, when we have somebody on our team, whether it's family or a coworker, who is obviously in that place where their amygdala is totally hijacking the rest of their sanity, how do we short circuit that? How do we get in there and actively help them? Because it would be easy to take the reaction of you're being stupid, or you're being an asset, or you're being whatever it is, that would be that easy emotional reaction. But that's not the right thing, because it's their amygdala talking. So how do we help them through that?
Precisely. So one of the easiest things to do when that's happening at you is to become amygdala hijacked by it yourself. Like, when someone's displaying one of the 5 common forms of resistance, which is what happens when our amygdala freaks out, those are doubting. So, like, playing devil's advocate, questioning that what you've said is valid, fighting, right? Just like creating tons of arguments that go nowhere, bonding, which is effectively like going to the people that you think are going to agree with you and talking and verbally processing with them, avoiding, so just being like super checked out, just like not responding to emails, or looking for an escape route, so looking to change teams, change companies. Any of those 5 forms of resistance can pop up for someone when someone's amygdala is hijacked. When one of those is coming at you, it's so easy for your amygdala to react the same way. What I usually recommend is, if that's happening at me, I'm just going to make a little mental note, like, okay, something's going on for this person. I need to give them time and space to kind of regroup, have their prefrontal cortex come back online. I'll try not to just be like, hey, it looks like your amygdala is hijacked. do you want to take a minute? Because that can sometimes escalate it. I'll try to be as gentle as possible. Honestly, sometimes when someone knows about amygdalas, I can use that language and it'll make them laugh a little bit, and like that helps. But mostly I'm just like, it feels like now's, maybe not the most optimal time to talk about it, or it feels like we could use some more brainstorming, quiet brainstorming time about this, whatever it is. Give them some time and space and kind of like a next step. So like, hey, let's chat again at 2. Let's chat about this over email. Let's chat about this tomorrow. Like say when you're going to talk about it next. This is especially useful if there's like a power dynamic at play, because if this is your manager or if you're their manager, you want to make sure that this isn't just going to like fester forever. Like you do want to resolve it soon. And then honestly, what I like to do, this is my coaching hat, is I'll ask some genuinely curious, open questions whenever we do chat next about that core need, and like to help them try to figure out which one of them might have been threatened. Once we talk about amygdalas and prefrontal cortices, because basically everybody who works with me knows that I want to talk about that. They're well prepared for that conversation. But I'll say like, it really felt to me like it was, sense of belonging. Was that what was going on, or was it something else? Or I'll just ask questions like, what's feeling hardest about the situation for you? What's most important to you right now? If you could wave a magic wand, what one thing would you change? Like these kinds of open questions that start with the word "what" can feel a little bit more like a dialogue, like a two-way dialogue, and help this person kind of process things for themselves, come to their own conclusions, which is much more motivating to kind of change things in the future.
So apparently, speaking of amygdalas, my son is watching, and there's a very excited 4-year-old. He's very excited about hearing about all this right now. So that's awesome. Hi, Alex.
Hi.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly important. I mean, one of the hardest things I've ever had to do as a manager or as a leader, even when I'm not a manager, is be able to exercise that self-control when I can feel that amygdala hijack happening to myself.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when I'm in a position where I'm supposed to be cool and calm and collected. I'm supposed to be a leader, right? And yet somebody's coming at me with their hijacked amygdala. They're all in a storm, and sometimes it's really it's you can slip into that mode where you can actively be empathetic and all those things, and sometimes it's tough.
Sometimes it feels really personal. Yeah. Especially if the way that they're reacting towards you does affect one of your biceps core needs. Like this also happens during feedback. Like when someone's giving you feedback and it triggers one of your biceps core needs, like this is threatening my status in the group, or this is threatening my sense of choice, or this feels unfair. I feel like I'm, about to be alienated because of this feedback. Like any of these core needs can be affected via feedback. And so again, when that happens, it's just so easy for our amygdalas, even though we're like supposed to be leaders, we're humans too at the same time. And like, we're going to have some emotional reactions to things, which by the way, takes a lot of work to like sense that in yourself and know when's appropriate to just like take a step aside.
Yes. Yeah. Speaking of taking a step aside, I mean, part of this comes into energy management, how you manage your own energy. So how have you found yourself managing your own energy, and how have you seen how people that are out in the world facing this in technical leadership really being affected by this?
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting to see, because I've been working with a lot of my coaching clients for years now. It's been really interesting to see them behave really differently in terms of their energy management now than in the past. And my best guess is that this is just all taking such a huge toll on us that it's kind of unprecedented in terms of how we need to manage our energy. For some people, actually diving into work is really helpful. That is not true for everybody, but I want to call it out. If someone is finding themselves really enjoying having something that gives them that feeling of improvement and progress and choice and like significance in their work, it makes sense to like dive into it and spend a lot more time doing it. But that's not everybody. For most of us, we are mostly horizontal on our couch or just at the end of the day, I can't remember what time it was last night. My husband and I were watching TV. It was early and he was like, I think I'm ready to go to bed. And I was like, yeah, it's like way earlier than normal, but it's just, we didn't do anything yesterday. It's just, we had a normal work day and then it was just exhausting. So what I'm sensing mostly is people are just unnerved by how differently their bodies and their brains are reacting during this totally, again, unprecedented time, which makes sense.
Yeah. No, one of the things I've been very appreciative about at work is our president, Brad Smith, whenever he sends out the communications, one of the things that he's been saying, which I'm happy to share publicly, is it's okay not to be okay right now.
Yeah, good.
And that is
good.
such an amazing message to have come from the very top of the company, especially right now, because there are times when all of us are going to be, looped out.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It sounds like a leader that's like modeling what, actually creating that certainty, creating that predictability for the people in their organization. I find that the best leaders right now who are handling this effectively are being really clear in their communications. As in, when I say clear, I mean giving actual facts and giving like updates and changes kind of as much as possible as they happen with like very succinct language. Those same leaders are prioritizing one-way communication over requiring lots of two-way communication, meaning, updates like emails out or all hands where they are talking at a group but aren't requiring lots of other participation back and forth, which can be really exhausting for folks, especially folks with childcare duties. And the third thing that great leaders are doing right now is like not asking people just that general open-ended question like, what do you need? How can I help? That's helpful sometimes. But during this time, it's much, much, much better to say, like, here's what I'm thinking about doing for you to help you, or here's how we want to support you. Here's some specific, tangible ways that we as an organization are trying to support you right now, whether that's, hey, we're hitting pause on performance reviews for the next 2 quarters, or, hey, we just added 2 weeks of additional PTO, or, again, specific is best. But that's so much better than asking, is there anything else? Because frankly, people don't have the brain capacity to come up with on their own ways that their leaders can help them right now.
And, you speak about the performance review thing. It's another thing that we have coming up soon in our cycle. And you know what? It's interesting thinking about this because I actually don't mind somebody saying, look, you've been distracted. You've had issues. Mm-hmm. We've all had issues. And therefore, your performance wasn't necessarily what it is. And bonuses are tied to that. But there's a fine line about how do you communicate that in a way that it's okay versus the you suck.
Yeah, and I think that probably you're okay with it because you have enough power and privilege to know it's not going to affect your employment. For so many people, especially members of minoritized groups, any sense that they are less than productive or any acknowledgement of that can feel incredibly threatening or be incredibly threatening. Like in actuality, a lot of people's jobs are being significantly affected by managers and leaders who just don't understand how this new era is supposed to work. There's this great blog called Ask a Manager where people write in letters to Allison Green, who then responds. It's almost always about like some HR issue or some management leadership issue, and there's just so many people who are being affected by leaders who don't understand how to actually assess performance during this time. By the way, it's not a great time to assess performance. Why would we be doing that? Like, it's just, we know that everybody's like, this is, again, unprecedented. We keep on using this word. I know it's ridiculous to keep on using it, but it's true.
Right.
I don't know what the benefit would be to trying to assess performance right now outside of the normal compensation and title adjustment structure. And again, those two things, if they're intertwined, there's a lot of other things I think managers and leaders need to be figuring out right now about how to accurately assess people's levels and roles. Performance reviews just feels like it's a terrible time. A friend of mine recently said to me, right now is a great time to run experiments, but a bad time to gather data on those experiments. And I think that that's perfectly true. All we can gather data on right now is how people perform during the first stage of a pandemic. There's no other data that we can accurately assess right now.
That's very insightful. I mean, that's actually super insightful because my own bias is towards experiment all the time and work. And, this is an experiment, what we're doing here.
Totally.
But it is the insight of be careful how you measure during this time is really important too. It's what insights, of course, that affects what kind of insights you can pull from your experiments.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and you can't get any good data except, again, how people behave during the first stage of a pandemic and how it's affecting you personally. But even then, it's time bound. The person who shared that beautiful thought with me was Sarah Wachter-Betcher. She's a coach and she's just an incredible thought leader in a bunch of just like, inclusion work and algorithms. She's amazing. But we were talking about this because I was running a bunch of experiments about online workshops. I'd always done them internally at companies before, but I'd never offered them to the public. And so I started in April when everything completely changed. I had no more in-person workshops. I started putting them online, and some were selling out in seconds flat, and some were like trickle signups. And I was losing it. I was like, Sarah, I don't understand. Is it the time of day? Is it the day of the week? Is it the subject matter? Like, that's when she said this to me. Like, again, great time to run experiments. You cannot infer anything from these experiments, but definitely feel free to run them. It was actually really reassuring and exactly what I needed to hear.
No, that's. I'm going to internalize that and put that down into my own notes after this, because that's really
Definitely.
it's really important. I mean, I was about to ask. So when we're supposed to if we're in a place where we have to do performance evaluations, I was going to theorize. Well, is this a good time to at least see how coach people on their own resilience or own flexibility? But again, your point of, well, okay, that measures how they could do it during the first stage of a pandemic. How useful is that later? All you can say is, you're doing great at this.
Yeah. And again, I think if we're talking about coaching people, that's different than traditional performance review seasons. Like coaching people, supporting them, people through it, asking them open questions, helping them figure out what they need. That's amazing. This feels like a great time to help people during this stage do those things. That's not a performance review.
So true. So let's pick up this thread and redirect it just a little bit. In your book, you talk about a colleague of yours that shared a philosophy saying, optimize for long-term relationships.
Yes. Yeah, it's Jason Wong. Yeah, he's amazing.
How the hell do we do that right now?
Yeah. So, okay, when I talk about Jason in the book, and also when I talk about the same philosophy and approach during a lot of the workshops that I give, and I say the same thing in both places, that he and I have been getting every other week, breakfast together with another former colleague of ours since we've been working together. And what's funny is he's in New York, I'm in Portland, and we just switched them to being online breakfast clubs. And that's how he's always, this is my example to point to, that's how he has been optimizing for long-term working relationships, is he stays in touch, not necessarily breakfast, but actually continues to stay in touch. He wants people to reach out to him whenever they need some coaching or some advice or just a referral to a company, those kinds of things. During this season, I'm finding it's been really interesting to see who's reaching out. Definitely during that first month or so. I don't know about you all, but I had a lot of people reaching out, just checking to see if I was okay and vice versa. That cadence has changed. I definitely am sending a lot more note cards, and that's my little love language. I love sending little note cards to people. That's continued. But for me, it's been really interesting to see both the methods, the apps people are using to stay in touch. We just, my husband and I were having monthly movie nights at our house, and we just switched to using Netflix Party instead. So it's same group of people, just sign on at the same time, little chat window. I think that people are able to actually still have those long-term relationships. It's just we need to be really patient with each other and understand not everybody's going to be able to have the time, the headspace, the emotional ability to stay that connected. I'm really hoping that everybody's going to be understanding and forgiving when people fall off the radar during this time, because frankly, we all have different things going on and we all need to cope in different ways.
Definitely. I think one of the hardest things to realize about this time is that even the simplest things take so much intentionality. If you are always in the habit of bumping into your colleagues at the water cooler, or always in the habit of hitting the Starbucks up with your pals, reestablishing new habits, that's like walking into a new job. That takes months and years to actually sort out.
Totally. Yeah, the thing so Jason also introduced me to this idea of a first team principle. Are you all familiar with that? I'd never heard of it before he introduced it to me.
No, I don't think so.
So the idea is your first team are your peers. So almost if I'm a manager, that's the other managers in engineering, or my manager peers in design or product. So I love this idea, and it's when I started to think about okay, if I were to think about those people as my first team, instead of the people who report to me as a manager as my first team, it changes the way I get support. It changes the way I think about who I lean on and when. Totally, it's important to prioritize the needs of the people who report to you. But if I am considering my first team as my peers, I'm leaning on them for advice. I'm asking them how they're doing. I'm checking in to see what they need. They're checking in to see what I need. We're sharing information from our different departments across the organization. It's almost once I started to think about the strongest, most helpful workplace relationships I've had, it's almost always been members of that first team that I've been able to lean on and get support on throughout the years. So I'd offer that, consider who's your first team, whether or not you're a manager, who's the cross-functional peer folks that you have that relationship with, you can continue to lean on for support, especially during this time. Simona.
Lara, I'm so happy that you mentioned this, and this is something that I've also we've talked a lot about with Sarah Drasner and a few other colleagues of mine, and it's something that I'm personally still trying to wrap my mind around, because I think that for the longest time we are kind of educated and we grow into leaders to think about our team being the most important, and I want to prioritize my team, right? But what do you recommend doing to kind of switch that mindset, where you start thinking about your first team as being your peers as opposed to your direct reports?
Yeah. So I think about it in individual settings and in a group setting. So in an individual setting, I'll probably be thinking about who can I lean on to get some support with something that I'm personally going through. Maybe that's figuring out how to give some tough feedback. Maybe that's figuring out my career trajectory. Maybe that's, just like I'm processing this problem or trying to figure out this roadmap, but I could use an external gut check or rubber duck. I would then try to reach out to one of my cross-functional peer, first team members and see like, hey, do you have like 5 minutes? Can we chat about this one thing? I could use your perspective, your advice, your coaching, just like, again, rubber duck it with me. Honestly, that's like the easiest way to kind of like start to figure out, is this like a strong first team potential relationship that I could have? And if so, how can we build on that? So that's like an individual, like one-on-one perspective. Remind me to talk about manager Voltron crews in a second. So the group version of this is actually inviting some of your cross-functional peer leads to a routine, like maybe once every other week, 1 hour meeting in which you're sharing your dilemmas and actually coaching each other, creating a space for you all to process it. I would recommend keeping this group small, like 8 people is kind of the ideal number. I learned this from my days at Etsy when Paula Medina, who actually created their biceps acronym, she was the L&D trainer there, and she created this program called DENS, in which she created and facilitated these like small group cross-functional peer lead. Like for about 3 months, we would meet these sessions where we would all kind of share dilemmas and like Vegas rules, what people shared in there stayed in there. We could coach each other through, and it was some of the strongest relationships I'd had and continue to have since then. We kind of, my little cohort stuck together, and we basically grew up from like baby managers to like director levels by the time we each left. And I continued to lean on those folks in my career. It's something that we offer now at Wherewithal. We offer like a facilitation at companies of the same kind of thing, just because we found it so valuable. So manager Voltron crew. So I love asking other people to define, hey, what's a Voltron? Duncan?
Oh man, Voltron! You're harkening back to the comic book days, or not comic book days, but
yeah, 80s television,
days,
totally.
80s television.
Yeah.
I mean, you placed yourself as far as what generation you are by saying
totally.
Voltron.
Yeah. Can you give the viewers a little bit of information about what Voltron is?
So Voltron was, at least as far as I know, was one of the original kind of cartoons, I believe it was Japanese, where you had the 5 superheroes that all have like their armored outfits that they would run around and do all sorts of stuff on. And then when they needed to fight the big bad boss at the end of the episode or whatever, they would all come together and they'd make a Voltron, right? You'd have the guy at the head, you'd have the arms, you'd have everything. And, we've seen this happen in later cartoons, but that was
right. Power Rangers, Captain Planet, those guys. I think Power Rangers. Yeah. So definitely. Right. I love this as a metaphor for that first team. Like, each person's going to have different strengths and different skill sets and different things you might want to lean on them for, different ways that they could support you. And this is not just for your first team, but really everybody that you might lean on as you grow. I refer to this as your Voltron crew of support. I'll often suggest that this is a manager Voltron crew of support because your one manager can't be your everything. So you actually need to lean on a bunch of people to help support you as you grow. I don't know if there's like show notes at all after this, but I can link to a bingo card that I've created to help people kind of brainstorm who's already in their Voltron crew of support and where there are some gaps to kind of see how you might be able to fill in your Voltron crew of support to continue to get that the different skills, the different experiences, different perspectives that you can lean on as you grow.
Yeah, definitely. Let's get that because we'll update the description on the stream so that it's there. Also, just in case it went by so fast, who was the person who introduced you to the idea of first team?
Jason Wong. Yeah.
Jason Wong. Okay, so
we can also add a blog post definitely that he has written about first team principles.
So the same person that had this optimized for long-term relationships idea.
That guy. Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yes. Yeah. So again, I've been so lucky to have like a really supportive Voltron crew over the years before I even really had thought about what that could be. I think we can all can probably think about people that have like been in our work worlds for a really long time that we like continue to lean on, even as our roles change or our needs change or like the leaders that we're becoming changes.
And I think that's actually a really important concept for people who are technologists, but that find themselves evolving into leadership roles, because that's not necessarily something that a lot of people in technology ever thought, oh, I have to be good at my people skills. Oh, I need to be able to build these things. How do you actually, do this?
Yeah.
And also it's, especially for early stage technology careers, it's not something that's actually prized, some of these abilities. It's all about how well can you hack, the latest framework du jour. What's your React like? What's your Vue like? What kind of mad Node.js skills do you have? I don't know. This is all JavaScript because I'm picking on the young in this, but sorry about that.
No, but totally. But I think that like during this time, right, during this pandemic, we really need our strong leaders that have all these additional skills. Like we're not going to be healthy, happy humans at work unless we have strong leaders that actually can understand how to flex and grow and support their people too. So I think it's a perfect time to be talking about how we can grow these skills in ourselves and make sure that our leaders are getting the feedback that they deserve on how to continue to support their people.
Most definitely. So, change can hit your amygdala. It can flip you out. It can create all these stressors. It can put us in this position where we're all working from home and dealing with the stress. And now I'm hearing my 4-year-old down the hallway. That's awesome. There's this place where we're all facing these things. But this is also, periods of this kind of change are also huge opportunities. I mean, the one that was going around early in the pandemic was, well, Google and so many other great companies came out of one of the last major downturns, not the 2008 one, but the one before. Some others came out of the 2008 downturn. And of course, you look back on world history and the entire world changed after World War II. So, this is not a war. I hate the people who are using the whole war analogy to describe what we're going through. But the net impact on our world could be of that magnitude.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be challenges, like a whole bunch of people's jobs are unfortunately getting hit. A whole cadre of business models just got annihilated. I mean, all the folks in events businesses, right? They're in a world of hurt right now. And who knows how it's going to come back. But the needs are still there. And we'll have to figure out how this goes. So how do we make the most of this opportunity, do you think?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to me to see the split between people who are using bright spot language, opportunity language, silver lining language, and people who aren't. And I don't think that there's a right or wrong approach to this. I think some people will find a lot of value in thinking about this as like, where are the bright spots? I certainly feel that way. Like I'm an optimist in general, so it's really useful to me to think about what are the new opportunities, what are the new good things, that could come out of an enormous change like this. And there's some folks for whom that language is actually really painful because they are personally experiencing some pain, or it's a really hard thing to talk about because what's useful to one person is really harmful to someone else. For me personally, I'm trying to remember the importance of being flexible. Definitely the thing that I was hit by the hardest was all my plans for this year didn't evaporate, but they were no longer set in stone. And it really reminded me how little control I have over my environment and surroundings. So for me, a bright spot has actually been getting that reinforcement of the need to be flexible and actually remembering to get some practice. I've had to practice being flexible during this. So yeah, again, I think the language is just really tricky to talk about in like a healthy, concrete way, just because it affects everybody so differently. But for me personally, I can think of a number of bright spots, again, even though it's really, really hard to talk about.
Well, and I think part of it is how do we help people through the grief of the things that they've lost, like
right, and the humans that they've lost.
Yeah, like again, coming back to people whose business models no longer matter. I mean, how do you help them get through that so then they can get to that next place where they can do something again?
So with a lot of my coaching clients, because they're individuals who work at companies, some of them have obviously been affected by layoffs and some of them haven't. So they're thinking more about like how can they make sure that they are setting up the rest of their career for success going forward. When I talk to fellow small business owners, it's actually been really interesting to see how each person has been impacted super differently. As you said, some of it's based on like the industry or the vertical that they're in. Others, frankly, are just being impacted by the inequity of the support systems, inequity of the demographics and how they're being impacted. Like a friend of mine who applied for the PPP in the United States, who was a woman of color, got a small fraction of what she deserved because of a series of issues with a bank. So like, it just kind of proves that there's been a bunch of studies about how 95% of minority-owned businesses will not be getting the support that they need in order to move forward. So for me, this conversation is less about how can we figure out new opportunities for business models going forward, and much more about reinforcing the fact that we really, really need to invest in correcting a lot of inequities in how people are impacted by this horrific thing that's been happening.
You know, first off, I have to say thank you for pointing that out, because, you know, my own white guy bias just is completely focused on one thing, and that, I mean, yeah, it's there.
Totally.
And one of the things I've been taking out of this whole experience is that this entire episode has been magnifying change. It's been accelerating change. Things that were going to take decades to happen are happening now in months.
Right.
But it's also magnifying where the structural fault lines are in some pretty major and massive ways.
Precisely. Yeah. And again, who has the privilege to be thinking about possibilities for the future versus who is underwater and won't have the opportunities to think about how they can pivot for the future because they need to survive today. Yeah, it's been, again, really fascinating as a white cisgendered woman, the privilege that I have in being able to talk about this stuff, actually feel, relatively speaking, comfortable with the future. It's definitely been a really important refresher that, like you, I am super privileged here, and I need to make sure that I'm doing my part in supporting people who don't have that privilege and who are severely impacted by what's going on.
Right.
This is true for managers, by the way, not just small business owners.
Well,
hey, managers, your people are being disproportionately impacted sometimes.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, it affects us in so many ways. I mean, one of the chief problems that I've helped the startups that I work with out is trying to figure out okay, let me rewind. One of the biggest questions I always get asked is, well, how do I actually get more diverse workforces? How do I actively get more diversity into the flow? And of course, one of the things that happens during periods of stress like this is we fall back on our innate connections. We fall back on the comfortable connections, and so that's going to become even trickier.
Absolutely true. Yeah, I think that this is unfortunately a time in which a lot of the initiatives, as you said, that have been being pushed along, diversity initiatives, inclusion initiatives, will definitely be, unfortunately, deprioritized, which is, you can imagine my point of view on this. It's a terrible time for that to be happening when people who are minoritized need that support, the most. Yeah, this is what a mess we are in right now.
Definitely. Wow. So
womp womp.
What kind of tactics can we give ourselves to help, especially those of us who sit on top of the privilege pile, but also just for everybody who of all of us, because we all come in with our innate biases, we all come in with our subconscious whatchamahoozits. What are some of your favorite tactics for helping you see past those?
So I think that my point of view on this is severely impacted by the amount of data that we have on promotion rate inequity and compensation inequity. So my first step in talking about this is not usually about unconscious biases, because there's just so much. This could be like a 6-hour call about how we can start to tackle those. I prefer to start talking about the numbers that we can look at and that leaders can take a look at to start to address the potential inequities. There's a couple of blog posts that I can also include for the eventual description here about how to kind of track those things and start to figure out how to address the potential inequities that you're going to see. Often we see people of members of minoritized groups not get promoted as quickly as their counterparts, and also not be, the wage gap is real. It's very disparate for members of different groups. So how can leaders actually take a look at that and address that? I think that that's frankly much more of an important and impactful thing to tackle right now than feedback performance review cycles, because performance review cycles are rife with opportunities for unconscious bias and like perpetuating inequities, especially like we talked about before, decreased productivity. Like it's just a mess. So as much as possible, instead of trying to like connect compensation improvements to performance, right now just taking a step back, taking this opportunity to take a look at your spreadsheet of everybody, how they're being compensated, and try to correct a lot of that potential inequity.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I would be totally fine if my own management chain came along and said, okay, no, we're not going to worry about increasing people's, but giving out the bonuses and the raises that we usually do instead, or just going to use this as an opportunity to do some resets and use that budget to do that. That would be an amazing thing right now.
Be huge. That'd be huge. Yeah, because it exists, and there's a lot of reasons why it exists that are too long to get into the 10 minutes we have left. But I think this would be a huge time. I mean, I would kind of liken it to all the construction that I'm seeing outside. It seems like, at least in Portland, they're taking this time to actually do a bunch of road work that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. I think this is a perfect time to do a very similar amount of road work internally at our companies, correcting inequities.
That's an amazing point. For sure.
Also fix potholes. Yeah, it's really important.
No, got to fix all those potholes, especially in places that have way too many of them.
Absolutely.
So this whole bit, one of the big transitions that we've seen has been, okay, we've obviously had to try to figure out how to do remote work. And of course, one thing I keep telling a lot of my colleagues is, this is not work from home. This is work from home during pandemic, which is two totally different things.
Totally.
But it's obvious that we are resetting how we work a little bit. I was listening to the Masters of Scale podcast yesterday, and the CEO of Verizon was talking about various ways in which they see this, permanently setting in. Or I guess a really good example is Jack at Twitter has said, we're going to make being in the office permanently optional.
Right.
What other changes like that do you think might stick with us, might have a good chance of sticking with us?
I'm really excited about it. I mean, there's things I'm concerned about too, again, on the inequities front, but I think I'm really excited about the potential for more flexibility. I'm mostly excited about it because I think this opens up, it kind of teaches folks that what we thought was impossible might not be impossible. I think of a lot of companies that really thought that work from home was never going to work for their organization. People could never make the transition to it, or they didn't trust the people to be able to be productive. There's lots of reasons why that might have been something that they believed before. In many ways, for many industries, this experience has proven out the opposite, that it is possible for many folks. So for me, I'm excited about it because it's a good example to make us say, what else? What other truths can we maybe revisit? If we all can do our jobs from home, what else we previously believed was true could we start to, I'm going to say, experiment with going forward?
Definitely. And how do we restructure? Because obviously, we do like human connection. We want that human connection, and so therefore we should.
It's a core need.
Yeah,
right.
we should definitely figure out how to do it. But can we be doing that differently? Right?
Yeah.
Does that always have to happen in the open workplace?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's been really interesting to see also how some managers, in order to kind of foster more connection, have made more mandatory meetings. So to any manager out there who's started to do that, you may need that connection, but remember that not everybody is going to need that connection. So do a gut check on your teammates' core needs first.
Definitely. All right, Simona?
Yeah, and I think this falls into the conversation really well. We have a question from the chat asking, how do you think it's the best way to keep your team engaged, especially when you work remotely and you're not in the same room anymore?
Yeah, this is such an important question right now. I've been hearing this a bunch from managers and leaders that are worried about what they're seeing, how they're seeing their teammates behave. Their teammates appear less engaged. I love it when people ask me this question because I get to tell them, of course they're less engaged. There's a pandemic happening. That's normal. That's expected. This is not a time to increase or focus on increasing engagement. It's really totally a time to figure out what's going on for your teammates. Definitely. It's definitely time to like understand what's hard about this for them, what they need help with, like what kind of new programs, new ways of working might help support them. This is totally the time for that. Increasing engagement should not be our priority right now because frankly, people still have a lot of stuff going on that's outside of work that they do need to prioritize in their lives. It's okay if you're seeing decreased engagement. That's expected. That's normal. You'll be fine. It's a great question.
I wonder if we do think further, though. I mean, Duncan and I have been working remotely for probably the past 2 or 3 years, and this is something that I've been reflecting on for probably the past year or so, where I think I do enjoy that bit of being in the office and kind of having that banter in person and the actual water cooler. And it does sound like we have a lot of conversations around, hey, this is going to be the new normal. And even though everything's changing now, there's going to come even more change in the near future. Can you tell that that's not feeling comfortable? But that's actually been a question on my mind as well. Like in a normal situation, when you have teams working remotely, how do you make sure that you still create that human connection? Like even if it's not intense engagement, rather human connection that you don't get the opportunity to do in person?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I find that the most successful programs that people have tried out to kind of foster that human connection when everybody's distributed come from not the managers or from the leaders, but come from individual contributors, because they're starting a new Slack channel about sourdough bread baking, or maybe they're starting a coffee exchange program from people who wherever they work around the globe, just like sending coffee to other people in their group from their location. It feels so much healthier when it is kind of like grassroots organized. Obviously, it needs some encouragement and some support from top level leadership. Maybe leaders saying, we can have a budget for these things, or if people have ideas, here's a place to suggest them. That way it's not just like you're waiting for someone to say something and no one feels comfortable saying anything. For me personally, the thing that I found helped the most, even though a lot of us were in the office when I was working at Etsy, we still had a somewhat distributed team. We had Friday afternoon demos that were optional. So I ran basically a platform, a product infrastructure group. And so we had a lot of people working on a lot of different tools and systems. And so every Friday afternoon, again, optional, we'd all come together and share one thing that we learned or did this week. And it didn't have to be completely done. It could be totally half-baked. One memorable demo session, someone shared a picture of them crossing the finish line at a marathon that they had run that week. Lots of times people were like, check out this totally bananas thing I learned. And they'll basically hack something together, show a new quick tip or a new technique that they had just found that week. We clapped after everyone shared, which was intentionally ridiculous. We did it laughing, it wasn't like, oh, good job. It was a little bit more of a celebratory feeling, but we made sure that everybody who was in the room had a chance to speak. People could pass if they wanted to, but we found that doing this every single week, again, optional, everybody came because you got to see your teammates. You got to see what they were working on. Often what they were working on informed the thing that you were working on, or they just heard about a new launch that you hadn't heard about yet from somewhere else in the company. It was a nice way to kind of foster that information sharing, but also just you learned so much about your teammates and what they were excited about. And we got to nerd out so much every single week. It was a really lovely way for us to continue to kind of foster that dialogue without it feeling oppressive or purely work related.
I love that. I love that ability to make it optional, but also for not just to be optional, but to be what people are passionate about, what they want to nerd out on.
Yeah.
All right. Well, sadly, we could talk for so long on this, but we should. I mean, we don't. Time isn't strict right now, but we probably should manage to stay to some level of normalcy so that you can get on to whatever next conversations you have. But we've been asking a few questions of all of our guests during this, and it's our rapid fire section, and I'd love to ask you these.
Great.
What's the one thing you've missed the most while being in lockdown?
Hugging my friends. Definitely the inability to hug my friends has been the hardest part.
That's actually been all the people I've asked this question, that response is the number one response so far. Yeah. I don't have solid scientific data on it, but it's starting to really feel like a solid trend. Hugs.
A trend, yeah.
Yeah. On the flip side, what's the thing you find yourself being most surprised that you really enjoy about this time period?
So, okay, this is a weird one. I forgot what it felt like to make incremental progress learning a new thing. And there's been two things. We actually have like a squat rack in our basement, and I've been actually making incremental progress on deadlift, squat, and bench press, and that's felt really, really nice. I did powerlifting a long time ago, and I forgot what it felt like to make incremental progress, like every single week doing something over and over again. The other thing is I've been painting a mural in that same little gym corner of like some Pacific Northwest trees and mountains, and it's been surprising how like meditative, just like it's like a little fake huge watercolor on my wall, and it's been surprisingly nice to just zone out for like 5 hours at a time and do that.
Oh, that's so awesome. That's so awesome.
It feels good.
And then the last question, if you could go back to and tell yourself something in January, just one thing, what would it be?
Stock up on toilet paper. And remember to be flexible, right? Remember that like, even though you have everything set in stone right now, flexibility is a skill.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this conversation, Lara. This has been great. I really appreciate it. Very grateful for you making time and coming and staying with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
So that brings to the end this episode. This is a couple of reminder notes. Build is happening this week. In fact, it just kicked off, and it's 48 hours online nonstop. So if you want to check that out, there's lots of good things there. I found myself very surprised, actually, with some of the sessions that I'm looking forward to. But I should mention that we're actually doing a version of this format at Build, where we talk about resilience with startups with some of our folks inside of Microsoft during one of the sessions. So if you look up Create Resilience on the Build program, you'll find us. And we're going to do something quite like this. Maybe a little more condensed on time. We don't have an hour. We only have like a half hour, I think. But check that out. And with that, we will close out. And thank you again for everybody who joined us and has been listening to these. This is awesome. And now I'll fumble through ending the stream.
I think a lot of people are kind of scared to do anything at the moment, or maybe scared to like start a new business. The rest of the world's kind of on pause. So if you can jump in and start creating something, there's a lot of opportunity in that. They can generate traction. It's kind of like any startup. If you can prove product market fit, then yeah, you'll get funding.
As the first team one that I'm still